So I want to begin by just asking you a little bit about what you do, because I know Christine mentioned a little bit about your work, but I'd love to hear in your own words. Why does Google pay you money to run a creative lab?
It's not to play. We do serious work. It's worth the money because this is being filmed. I think what we do and have always tried to do is literally connect all the pieces of kind of brilliant thinking and output from Google and the people who could benefit from them. And sometimes that's just telling people they exist. Sometimes that's putting them in a context that they're very understandable. Sometimes that's actually working with the people who make the products to make those products either easier to use or easier to understand, more accessible. But it's called the Creative Lab simply because we have a lot of different people who are writers, illustrators, designers, data visualists, editors, and some coding people. And we mix that all together to try to come up with whatever will kind of get those benefits understandably into people's hands.
Right. So people can actually easily understand and use whatever it is that the engineers might be developing, but don't have the same sense of how to deliver that.
Exactly. I mean, things are invented daily, and sometimes you see something that's been invented. So do you realize how valuable that would be to this group of people if we could make sure that we could explain it, show it, have people understand it in the right way? So that's what we do. We are just trying to make that connection from the true geniuses at Google, which are engineers.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so I'm curious because you don't give many talks. You're very much behind the scenes. You don't go to many conferences, but somehow you show up here, along with some other very strange fellows from different places in the world. So I'm curious, what brings you, what draws you to this particular topic around wisdom in business?
Well, first of all, I think you'll know why I don't do a lot of speaking by the end of this. Here's the basic truth why I'm here. Besides a little bit of confusion about last year's sponsorship of Wisdom 2.0, I was incredibly lucky because someone at Google, I love this story actually. Someone at Google came and asked me if...
So we did it last year, Google hosted it.
Google hosted it, yeah, sorry. Google hosted this last year, and someone came to me and said, hey, I hear you're into all this kind of like wisdom-y stuff. And I said, yeah, I love that kind of stuff. I read a lot about it, and I don't know anything about it, but I like to read about it. And I said, oh, okay, great. And then they said, because there's this conference coming to New York, and you would dig something like that? I said, yeah, sounds pretty interesting. So then suddenly the conference comes around, and I have tickets to the conference. But Soren, this guy Soren who runs the conference, is being super nice to me. Like really nice. And I'm thinking like, is he this nice to everyone who just comes to his conferences? And then I kind of put it together that person from Google asked me actually said that I was the executive sponsor and I would request that this be hosted by Google, which surprised me. And then Soren said, so do you want to come up and say hello and introduce everything? And I was like, I shouldn't be up here at all. I don't know anything about wisdom. But he had the good sense of humor to actually let me up on stage. So that's how I got here the first time. But honestly, why I love this and why I would always come back is a little bit about what we talked about before, which is I have no idea who I'm going to meet here. Like there are a lot of conferences and I can generally kind of guess who the kind of people I'll meet at a different kind of conference, but I have no idea who I'll be sitting next to here. And I hope you all take that the right way. I just think whether people are here for professional reasons, personal reasons, whether they've actually attained enlightenment, or they are deeply struggling with lack of enlightenment, I will come away with some odd connection. And I sort of believe in those things. And God knows none of my friends or my family wants to talk about Eckhart Tolle. I mean, so I must say too, Dan Harris killed it. I really was sitting out there thinking, well, we don't really have to, I don't need to go up there. That's exactly me, except and I have much more embarrassing film. I mean, it's embarrassing with the 5 million people, but I could top that for. But that's why I'm here. I also think the topic in business is pretty interesting because, you know, the balance of pressure. I'm a manager, well, at least in name, of group, and you sort of think about these things often kind of in a bit of a closeted way, but then try to think about them at work or in a job or managing people and sort of figure out how those can work in. And for the absolute record, I think I would say that I suck at it.
Now, how many people how many people report to you?
About 70.
70.
Yeah.
And so one of the main topics here when people, we asked what brought them here, mindful leadership was one of the topics. And I communicated with Andy before, and I said, you know, often managers, the word manager and the word asshole used to be used kind of simultaneously. And so I feel like there is this new role. If 70 people are reporting to you, how do you go about that in a way that is mindful or is wise or is compassionate or is at least creative and understanding versus the old top-down method?
Your question presumes that I do that.
I know you do.
I would say I try. I'm probably about a 3 out of 10 if I had to judge myself. But I'm so glad that Dan used the word asshole a bunch of times, so I felt better about throwing that around up here. But I honestly, I feel it all the time at work. Like I feel the encroachment of assholedom at every minute, and I feel it as like a struggle, and of, you know, when you're doing things and you have to make decisions that are, you know, frankly don't have two great winners or anything. I am so feel better about Adam this morning because I can now tell everyone I deal with, particularly my 2 teenage daughters, that I'm a disagreeable giver. That should cover so many new areas. But I think that's a really cool thing that he said that because I am just struggling with it. Yeah. I'm so far away from having it perfected. If my team was here, they would laugh out loud that I've attained some kind of perfection there. But like I said to you before, I think it's okay to struggle. I think when people are forced to appear that they're not struggling or that they know it all, I think that puts you in an impossible position because you might have to make a tough decision that people don't like, but you also worry every single minute of every day about all those people's livelihoods, right? That are on you. That not that you're some kind of hero or anything for that, but you do feel that. Like you feel a huge responsibility for that, but you also, you know, have to make decisions, say no, do those things. And so if there's some space that's more enlightened than I am or in general, like I'd love to get to it, but I can't say that I do it. But I do think even the conversation about it, or even when I talk to the group about it, and there's someone in our group who decided they wanted to take over, sort of be in charge of wellness for the group. So I thought that's amazing. But yeah, that's why I'm here, mostly because I'm just working at it. I'm not, yeah.
And so what in your experience, if you guys are working on a project and everybody wants that great idea or that great innovative, creative thing that nobody saw, right? Everybody likes trying to get to that. What do you think helps to foster that? And what do you think helps to like get in the way of that?
Well, one of the things I realize is that there's kind of two roles you could take. I've sort of aged out a bit in making the actual donuts, right? Like they're 20-somethings. I can't actually get my hands anymore into all the software and stuff to make things. So I either useless overhead or a community building manager, depending on how you look at it. But I do feel there is some value in, maybe because I have to, in creating the space or the environment where people can fail, where they can try whatever they want, they can sort of be their maybe odd self, and that's okay. So I feel actually sort of the most reward when I am able to sort of give permission or not give permission when people feel they don't have permission, to reassure them that they actually do have permission, and that we need their completely unique random combination of things that made them who they are, their background, their odd love of odd music, their whatever, and not try to follow everything else, but to be their wonderful random odd self. And that's probably the most rewarding thing. I mean, when you have to, sometimes you have to pull that back a little to make other things fit, but I think that's more of my role. It's just more rewarding.
Yeah, right. To create a space and environment where the team can come up with creative ideas based on their own unique talents and personalities.
And also, I mean, and I'm flawed at this. We all get our hands in when we shouldn't too much, and but the more you can kind of step back and let other people do, right, and try things, I think there is just a second phase, I think, to the whole thing where your job is to make the environment, not the thing.
Yeah, gotcha. But then all kinds of things can be created from that environment if you're able to hold it in the right space.
Yeah, amazing things could happen. You can generate a lot of screw-ups too. You can, but I think in the big scheme of things, you get more out of people when you say, like, who are you and what do you have to say? Right. Out with it. The good thing about, one thing about, we're insanely lucky about at Google is in a lot of different areas. Let's put it that way. So there, as creative people think about things and sort of pursue their own interests, they very often run into, I mean, just search alone, right? Like what they're interested in. If you're interested in something, you often pursue it through search. So you can, I don't have to very often take people away from what they love and push them in a different direction. There's usually a way to take what they're passionate about and find that overlap space where they can do something that no one else is capable of, or I could never imagine.
And so what do you think are the kind of drawbacks? So when Dan was talking about, like, I don't care if you have 5 jobs and 12 kids, like, everybody has 5 minutes a day. And it seems like for most of that creative juice to really flow, it takes at least to being able to stop and to quiet and to settle for a short bit of time to tap into something that is from that kind of inner vision place. And yet, if you look at most companies, everyone's running around like, mice on a wheel, right? Just trying to do. What do you think is so hard, and the potential value of actually being able to stop and to have that moment, like Dan had talked about, the moment of presence?
Well, I think it's immensely valuable. I guess it's also a thing about do you make it genuinely permissible and encouraged? We're a place where everyone's kind of going at their own, well, at some high speed. Let's put it that way. And so there's a lot of latitude for people to come and go as they want, to work bizarre hours if they like working these hours or whatever it is. So I think ideally you encourage people to just do whatever works for them, right? So they feel they have permission to do that. But yeah, it's harder and harder. I can't tell you, we very often say to people that, like, if you get an email, this is a kind of a recurring thing, if you get an email from someone in the middle of the night, that means they've time shifted for their way of working. That does not mean that you have to. That's the beauty of email. Well, the beauty of email is you never have to respond. But and people, I think, are got to release that pressure a little bit for people to say no. If they have kids and they need to stay up late because they want to go home and have their kids and they stay up late and do that, I'm not saying they have to stay up late, but if they work better or something like that, then let them do that. But And that way, use the technology in the best way it can be used, and not necessarily the typical or the, the most heard of. If that makes sense.
And so what do you think has that been part of why you see a lot of innovation happening from tech companies like Google? What do you think is the ingredients that might exist in those companies, Google or other tech companies, that maybe isn't as existing in some of the more traditional or standard companies? Because you worked in more of a traditional standard company, right, before?
Yeah, I've worked with a bunch of different companies. I don't know. I'm very hesitant to I don't know. It feels like hubris to talk about being more innovative or less innovative. I think that I actually think that a lot of innovation is coming from people who have mad access to all this stuff that's publicly accessible now and starting things up. So the freedom you have as even two young people to have an idea and then build it on the back of all these tools that are publicly available is enormous. So if you're two people who work in a big company and you don't feel that type of freedom, then that big company needs to do something to make sure that you do, right?
Otherwise, they'll go off and start.
Yeah, that's very hard, and there's a lot of really unique challenges about having a big established brand and trying lots of things, because once you're big enough and people have a certain expectation of you, once you start trying random other things that two people in a garage could try from a base of zero brand, you run into all kinds of crazy problems. Because
you have to worry about your reputation and they don't.
Yeah. That's one. I mean, one of the liberating things is if you start a little startup is that you are coming from a complete sort of legacy-free start, right? So there's different considerations in all these things, but
and you're more free to fail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You are more free to fail.
If you're a bigger company, you have more identity invested in.
Yeah, you have a set of expectations that are set, right? And you don't have the liberty of really working outside of those entirely. So it can be an indulgence rather than being thoughtful about it.
Right. So then the challenge, I would guess, would be to try and support that within a larger, that the institution grows bigger, but that the freedom that people have to fail and to try.
Yeah.
Great. So we are almost out of time, but my guess is there's one or two questions, and I always want to make sure that we allow for some questions, and I believe we have our good friend Mike Renner. So we'll just have time for just one or two, but if you have a question for Andy.
Hi, Keith Fiveson with Work Mindfulness. And my question is, looking at innovation and creativity, this visioning process, many companies use, visioning, strategic sessions, hindsight, where were we, insight, where are we, foresight, where are we going to go? My question around mindfulness and around the workplace is, how often does that get incorporated into an organization like a Google or any other organization to really kind of stop and take a pulse, take a heartbeat, and say, are we walking our talk? Just a perspective, and how does that lend itself to creativity and innovation?
Well, Google's a big place. So my group is one particular subgroup. I think that. Yeah, there's a lot of that going on. One of the things when if you get big enough, you could be so attuned to what's happening inside. There are literally so many things to take care of internally that can literally absorb all your mind space. And I think we're still small enough in my group that we literally, being in New York is a huge help, I think, to begin with. Just going outside and making sure that what we're thinking about is not just the other problem of crazy work schedules, and I think this can apply to everybody, is that if you're working a ton and that's in vogue, you can end up very easily just realistically only seeing the same amount of people talking about the same things over and over and over and over without even noticing that that's happening. Encourage people to go out and get away, talk to people you've never met before, talk to people who are unlike you, talk to people We can do that. We're a little smaller, but there are bigger and more formal processes like you're talking about.
But each team kind of does their own.
Yeah,
each
yeah.
team is trusted to manage their own.
Exactly. It's not really codified across the whole company.
Maybe one more, and then the great plan, the big ultimate plan. There's.
Yeah, hi there. I'm Kripa from Chicago. Question is, what's the interplay between wisdom and creativity? So, to what extent does wisdom constrain or inspire creativity? Do you think it has any relationship at all?
Just an easy little last question.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a haiku about that. I do think about that more than I should. It's interesting to hear, and because Google is generally a very scientific sort of place, it's so interesting to hear that everyone has different doors that they need to go through to get to different understandings, right? And some of these like little pieces of wisdom that have been passed down through every wisdom tradition in the history of mankind also need to be unpacked rationally in our age, supported by science, put back together to be believed, even though they have withstood thousands of generations of sort of, yeah, it always ends that way, right? And I think the wisdom thing allows you, just like Dan talked about, to like stop that train of thought and say, am I talking to myself? Is this really how, that sort of pause where you respond instead of reacting, where you think, does this make sense? Do people actually care about this? There's a real human being out there in the world who might be using their computer or watching TV or something. Would they actually care if they saw that? Like, if you get into enough emails a day and enough stuff, like, you will, it's not impossible to lose touch with that ability to stop and say, so whether some sort of understanding in that way of the meditative ability to understand your own thinking, I think is enormously important. I also think that the wisdom thing, or I heard once that the best description of creativity is making bridges between facts. And bridges between facts. So I know what people think creativity is like, oh, you go like, being creative. And I actually think there's a bit of a reverse to that where there may not be that many entirely new things under the sun, but there are an endless number of combinations of the things that are already under the sun. And the more things you know from completely incompatible fields and places, the more likely you are, and the more you sort of squint at them and not take them entirely literally, you are to make bridges between those. So something in the being in the present, not listening to the 4 things you regret and the 4 things you're worried about over and over and over and over, lets you be in the moment where you might observe those things, those facts, those realities that you could connect. Because if that's true, and in myself I've found it to be absolutely the voice in the head thing, not the schizophrenia one, I think. And they consume all of your mental power. So there's nothing new that could get in there. So I think it's all connected somehow. Someone else like Dan will make a great presentation about this. Someday.
If you're not aware of the voice in the head and you keep running with the voice in the head, this is what I hear. There's actually not the space for other more creative things to be seen because the capacity is taken up.
Yeah, I think so. Every once in a while you'll meet someone in your field and they'll say something and you'll say, oh my gosh, I've been looking at that same thing for 10 years and I never had that thought. And it's a great moment because it pulls you out of, I've just been circling on these past and future things instead of actually noticing
front of you.
What's happening?
So what's happening right now is that our time is up, and I want to thank Andy for coming back.
Absolutely, thank you.